Thank you for logging in to view this presentation. This presentation is the second of 4 seminars that we're doing this year to help educate our community and taxpayers on the finances of our Dunlap School District. This seminar focuses on the levy and how we go about getting our tax revenue coming into the district to help us operate. First of all, I want to go through some important definitions so that we're all on the same page as we go through the presentation. The property tax cycle is the annual process of adopting a levy and then receiving the tax money. The tax levy is the amount of property dollars a school district requests to operate the district for the next fiscal year. So the levy that we just adopted last night is the money that will operate the district for the 2016-17 school year. The property tax extension is the process of preparing the property tax billings by the county clerk. And then the equalized assessed value is 1/3 of the fair market value as determined by the assessor's office. So, and we'll go into a little bit more detail, but I wanted to give you those definitions. So the property tax cycle, it is really about a year-long cycle, a little bit over that actually by time you get through the whole thing. So November, the board approves a tentative levy. In December, the board approves the actual levy, and it gets filed with the county clerk by the last Tuesday of December. At the time that we file the levy, we do not know what our final equalized assessed value will be, but we have to put the levy in based on the amount of money we think we will need to run the district for the next school year. We actually, in March or April, is when we actually find out how much money we will actually get from our taxes when the property tax extension is released by the county clerk. And then May to June is when the property tax bills are sent to property owners. And then from June through December is when we actually get our tax payments. Our two biggest ones actually come in June and September. And those coincide typically with, if you think about it, when your tax bills are due. So there are several rules in regards to the levy, one of them really being the truth in taxation. And part of that is to protect the taxpayer. We want to make sure that you guys know what is happening, and the state of Illinois wants to make sure that you guys know what's happening with your taxing bodies. So if a levy that someone is requesting is 5% higher than the extension that they received last year, that's the actual amount of money that they received, not necessarily what they requested the year before, but the actual amount of money that was received, you have to do a truth in taxation hearing. And if you have to do a truth in taxation hearing, then that has to be published in the paper not more than 14 days before the hearing, but not less than 7 days before the hearing, so that everybody has a chance to see that notice and can make the arrangements to come to the hearing if they want to come. We actually had our truth in taxation hearing last night before the board adopted the levy. So then the question is how do we determine how much money we're going to ask for in the levy? And that's a really good question. And there's not, unfortunately, since we don't know what the true assessed value is, we can't totally base it on what the property value is because we really don't know what that is. So it's really part of the budgeting process where we look and say, what are we going to need to run the district for the next year? And then we back into it. But like for this year, our property tax rate is going to be 4.6%. And we take that times the $867 million, and then we come out with a property tax rate of about $39 million. So that's how we get to the numbers that we get to, but really we look at it and say, how much do we need to run the district for next year? That's what we request. That's not necessarily what we're able to get. So tax revenues, when we get them, where do they go? School districts must deposit property tax revenue into appropriate accounting funds as determined by the Illinois School Code and the Illinois Program Accounting Manual. And the amount that we can levy for in each fund is limited to an amount set in the Illinois School Code unless the voters of the district have at some point voted to increase that levy amount during an election, which you guys would hear that as a referendum, something like that. So where are we at right now? We have rate. Like the ed fund is maxed at 2.7%. We can't ask for any more than that. We can't get more than 2.7% in a tax rate for the ed fund. Same with the lease and special education. They're at 0.05 and 0.04 respectively. Operations and maintenance, which is what we use to support our buildings, pay our heat, pay for all of that, that's at 0.475%. And then transportation is 0.2%. Working cash and fire safety are both at 0.05%. And those are used, working cash is used to cover something if something that's not budgeted comes up that we have to pay for, that we can move that money from working cash into the appropriate fund to pay for some expense that we weren't necessarily expecting to occur. And then fire safety is for projects that are required by the state of Illinois to make sure that our buildings are safe and sound for our students to attend and our teachers to work in. Now we have three funds that do not have a max rate, but they're very, very, very specific on what can be paid for out of them. And they're very specific in order to protect our taxpayers. So the debt services fund is our bond and interest payments. That one is determined by when we sell bonds, we go out for referendum for bonds, things like that. The taxpayers have really already voted or put their voice out in regards to those. So that is at whatever level is needed to pay the payment at this point in time for this year. Tort is liability insurance for safety and security, legal fees, workers' compensation insurance, unemployment insurance, and then IMRF, Social Security, Medicare is non-certified retirement that we're required to pay, as well as Medicare for all staff members in the district. The big question we always get is, how is my property tax bill calculated? And it's not always easy to figure out, but the basic formula is fair property value divided by 3 times the tax rate equals your tax bill. So if you have a $250,000 house, you divide that by 3, that gives you $75,000, which is your equalized assessed value. You take that times the tax rate, and then you get the amount of your tax bill. This is before any exemptions come into play. As we all know, we're all pretty familiar with the homestead exemption. We all get $6,000 if we own and live in our house. So that comes off of that amount. So that's another decrease to your tax bill. But there are some others out there that people aren't as aware of, and you can find these on the county clerk's website. But it's a senior freeze exemption, home improvement exemption, senior exemption, returning veterans homestead exemption, disabled persons homestead exemption, and then a disabled veterans standard homestead exemption. So these are all things that come off after your property is appraised, before you get your taxes, before they figure out what your tax rate bill is, and then they take that off, and that's what you end up owing. So then the next question is that we hear a lot is, there's always new property popping up in Dunlap. How can you possibly not have all the money in the world that you need? Well, we do, and we are very excited that we have all these houses coming in, and we have new students walking in our doors every day. We are thankful for that. The challenge that we have is that new property doesn't come on the books for about 1.5 years after it's completed. So not when it's started, not when you start seeing them digging in the ground, but once it's completed. And what that means is, if a house is done and completed in January of 2016, and let's say they have a couple kids, the kids start school right away. So in January 2016, we are educating the kids and happy to do that, right? But the house and the taxes won't come on until December for the 2016 levy, which means we won't even see any of that money until the 2017-18 school year, which means we have responsibility for educating students for 1.5 years before we ever see any money coming from the houses where the students are living. So that's where there is a break in us getting the money to actually support educating the students. So that's where some of the challenge comes in. So you see our tax rate history, and we've gone over the last few years. we have had to go up, and that's because of increases in enrollment, increased costs in insurance and things like that. I'm sure you've seen that all in your own homes, that it's just gone higher and higher. Interest rates are at an all-time low, and we used to be able to offset some of the expenses with the interest that we would receive on the money as it's sitting in the bank, and we just aren't getting the returns that we used to get. So that all plays into the tax rate history. So the other thing that plays into the tax rate increase is, if you look at this chart back in 2000, 2001, all the way really until 2010, we had double-digit increases. That is amazing and really unheard of. But then we started going into that downward slide and ended in 2014 with a 0.07% EAV increase. Well, if EAV is going up by double digits, your tax rate can stay the same, but when it starts going down that much, your tax rate does have to grow with it a little bit. So that's what happened. There was some construction in there that played a part, but that's really why you see that change in the tax rate. And now, as you see it, the EAV is starting to balance itself out, and the tax rate is balancing itself out. So the tax rate from last year was 4.5119, and this year it will be 4.6049. And this will result in a $31 increase for a property with a fair market value of $100,000. So some of our funds had an increase that we're requesting as far as the tax rate goes, and some of them had a decrease in the tax rate. Working cash had an increase because we are requesting the full levy amount, which we did last year, but we didn't actually get that when the extension came out. And then tort is going up to help cover the additional costs of insurance, legal expenses, student growth, building the cost to insure more buildings, more buses, to have more staff. All of those increase tort expenses. And then IMRF, FICA, and Medicare will increase because we'll have to have additional staff for the growth that we're expecting, as well as staff raises, and the retirement pay goes up and payroll taxes go up as far as with salaries. And then bonds and interest. The EAV is increased, so our bond and interest rate is actually going to go down for this year. Talked about this a little bit on the last slide. I get ahead of myself every time I do it. But we talked about these already, but these are just in writing what I just said. And so the 2015 levy extension, as I said before, it's about 4.6%, and it'll be estimated about $31 for $100,000 worth of property. So it's not a terrible increase to continue financially supporting the district. So the tax rate that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, and you see some sheets, represents a ballooned amount. And what that means is we request more money than we think we can actually get based on what we think we actually need. And it's called balloons because officially I'm asking for more money in the ed fund than I can get based on the EAV that we're expecting to come in. But we need that money, so I'm going to request it with the hopes that maybe the EAV will go higher than what the assessor has given us, and then we'll be able to capture that money and really be able to do what we want to do within our school district. The positive part about a balloon levy is that it doesn't cause the tax rate to go any higher because we can only get the amount of those that's allowed within those funds. So your tax rate will not go up if the property value goes up. The amount of revenue we get will go up, but your tax rate will not increase. So it stays at 4.6 no matter what, even if we end up getting more revenue coming into the school district. So this next sheet is the sheet that I use to actually calculate the levy, and from compared to what we had last year to what we have this year, and what the increases are. And as you can see here, this on here, we have what we're going to be allowed to get based on what we think is actually going to happen, what the assessor has said, the 3.8%. But we've increased it by 5%, because wouldn't it be great if our EAV went up more and we were able to get more money to support our schools? So that's what the point is. So the levy amount in the ed fund here is $24.5 million. But in reality, we know we're only going to get 23.4. We're just hoping that we can get that 24.5 to really help us pay for our expenses that we have coming. And as I said before, if we get that additional money, the tax rate does not go up, because as you'll notice on the 3 funds that don't have a max rate, we didn't request more on the balloon amount because we've requested the amount that we need. So it doesn't make those, we don't have to ask for more if the EAV goes up because we've already requested what we need. Whereas in the others are capped at 1%, we ask for more so that hopefully if the EAV goes up, then we can capture that additional money without it being any higher rate for our taxpayers. This sheet is really what I use to calculate it, and there's a whole bunch of other sheets that go with it, but I wanted you to kind of see it and I wanted to explain that example. And then this is the final chart, the 2015 Levy Chart projected revenue for 2016-17, and this shows how much money we received in 2014 under the 2014 extension, and then how much we're expecting to receive with the 3.8% EAV increase. And then it shows how much new money we're expected to get in each one of those funds and how much the tax rate increased or decreased for each of those tax levy funds. And this is just a really good place for you to see. This is the new money coming in. And I know when you look at the ed fund and you see $857,000, that looks like a lot. But with our growth and our student needs for ESL and special ed, we have to add about 10 to 12 staff members a year, if not more than that, which comes out to between $600,000 and $720,000 every year that we add just in new staff. That doesn't account for salaries or increased supplies or materials. So it's really not that much money when you look at the scope of how much our district is growing, how many staff members we need to add, and the number of new kids that we are educating each year. So I wanted you to see that and understand what that is. And so this chart is just a real quick rundown of property tax rate plus the new money coming in and how it changed from last year to this year. The next slide is the FY17 budget and the levy. With the proposed levy, the ed fund is projected to be balanced for the 2016-17 school year. Actually, all of our funds are expected to be balanced for the 2016-17 school year. I'm not sure why, I just put in the ed fund. The balanced education fund, that's the one that has the most flexibility, the most ability to change, or the most one that's impacted by growth and things like that. So that's why we focus on it a lot. But it's based on the assumptions of a 3.8% EAV increase. The lease levy will continue to help fund technology within the district, and supplies and purchase services will be rolled at the current FY16 budget levels, with the exception of a few subscriptions to software services and things like that that we know go up every year. But those are all in the projections and already accounted for. And then we obviously, as I talked, we have some of the resources set aside for growth because we know we're going to have it. We already know, just based on the kids who are sitting in our desks right now, that we need more teachers for next year. So we are able to make that assumption, and we know that we're going to need it, and they're already accounted for. So I want to thank you for logging on and viewing this presentation. If you have any questions for me, my email is on the next page, and you're welcome to email me anything that you have another question about. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.